I was in a, like a Wright Morris kind of mood.
This is The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. On this episode, we're talking about Wright Morris. We'll focus on two of his stories from his collected stories, 1948 to 1986. We'll start off with The Origin of Sadness, and then stay tuned for a short bonus conversation about real losses, imaginary gains. My own fascination with Wright Morris started probably 30 years after this story collection was published. He was prolific and published novels, memoirs, stories, and even photography, and had a long career in writing that started in the late 1940s. But it was, I believe, 2016 when I first read an essay by Peter Orner about Wright Morris. It was in Orner's memoir and essays, Am I Alone Here? Notes on Living to Read and Reading to Live. The story by Morris he wrote about was a fight between a white boy and a black boy in the dusk of a fall afternoon in Omaha, Nebraska. I wasn't familiar with Morris's work before reading this essay. He's not the most popular writer. He is, for me, now, of course, essential, the kind of writer that Orner and I adore. Perfect for this podcast. What is it that we love? Well, as Orner said in his essay, no writer I could name builds his prose so completely around answerable questions. Orner discerns this quality in Morris's novel, Plains Song. Plains Song, different from Kent Harouf's Plain Song. Says Orner, he specializes in what I'll call inarticulate wonderment. I remember being struck by this description, inarticulate wonderment. His characters walk around in this state of awe that's difficult to articulate, but it's also something we recognize. There's a strangeness in these stories, but it isn't weird for weird's sake. There isn't anything gratuitous here. By its very definition, strangeness is just out there, different, odd, peculiar. Yes, and with Wright Morris, what is strange in his stories is discernibly real. And as with so many other things we talk about on The Lonely Voice, you just have to read the story to know what I mean. There's that inarticulate wonderment again. The origin of sadness. Okay, there's a guy named Schuler who's unconventional. All right, he's odd. He's a guy who likes what he likes. Canned grapefruit over fresh, his wife Doreen's shiny black hair, cough drops, and in one almost unbearably beautiful moment in this story, another thing he loves is remembering that he was once an adventurous child. Remembering that. Schuler's ruminating on his memories and the way the passage of time informs his life, not just his work, but his life. And that's something Schuler seems to love. All stories are about loss. A protagonist has lost something, searches for it, doesn't know it's missing, and that's the problem. For Schuler, what he was really seeking is the origin of sadness. He can be stopped in his tracks by fossil forms like a packet of letters undisturbed since the moment of pressing, and consider both their beauty and their long, quiet history right there on the cold, packed ground at the edge of an arroyo and feel his elation turn to a numbing pang of loss at the silent solitude of those relics lying there alone. Is it valid to say those fossils were able to slip time's noose just because Schuler found them? Did he find what he was looking for? Did he learn that sadness never ends? Here now, Peter Orner and I discuss The Origin of Sadness by Wright Morris.
So these stories, I was thinking that about the fact that when we do a podcast or when you write an essay about a story, you kind of lose it for a while. Do you know what I mean? that the sacredness of it dissipates because you've had to sort of say something about it. In that saying something about it, you say something, not permanent, but something that is. And then I think to me, you lose a part of the story by talking about it. Usually, I figure it's part of the deal. But with Wright Morris, and I've done it, I've written a lot about him. But what I love most is to come back to him not feeling like I need to say anything remotely articulate.
That I understand. Yes, that I get. I think that's the nature of reading, right? It's like and you've said this before and written about this before that yeah, there is a sacredness to just reading it alone. And when you try to talk about it, yes, you lose something. I totally agree with that.
And I mean, I think that something is oftentimes the thing itself. It's like you talk it to death. And so I was in like a Wright Morris kind of mood, like a like New York State of mind kind of mood. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe it's cheesy to say, but Billy Joel definitely captures that notion. And we all know what he means by a New York state of mind, even if we're not New Yorkers, right? And I feel like the other day I was in a Wright Morris place, and so I suggested we talk about him. And then when I read the stories, I just felt like this weird kind of pressure and distance to almost sell Wright Morris to our listeners who may not know him. And I don't want to do that. Like if people don't know him and they're interested after our conversation, which we should start, great. But like we could talk all day about, this great American writer who has been largely, not largely, completely forgotten.
Yeah. Well, but see, so many things that you're saying remind me of some of the things I was thinking when I was rereading The Origin of Sadness. And there is a paragraph in the story that reminds me of what you said just now and what you've said many times before in the last few years. This is what the story says. Perhaps nature herself spoke in this manner to those accustomed to listening. It was also characteristic that Schuller kept these revelations to himself. Explanations, however clever they were, would surely fall short of his expectations. And why would he reveal secrets known only to himself? These findings were forms of buried treasure that persuaded him to keep his own counsel. Deep within himself, Schuller was drawn toward secret agreements and pacts of silence. I mean, we'd like to scream it from the rooftops, right? And tell people about the story or that they should read the story or how much we love the story. But I get what you're saying, and I hear the echoes of that in Wright Morris, in The Origin of Sadness.
We should probably set up the story so people are like, what are these two going on about?
Isn't
But
it
that,
always the way?
yeah, but that paragraph that you read, and here I go talking about the story, which I said I wanted to do, and now, and then today I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do it. But this is the beginning of the story. He's a kid. This is a kid who is living in Kansas plains. He goes out on walks and finds, among other things, fossils embedded in the arroyos that cut through the plains, the flat landscape. And what looks like a flat landscape, which people call, I can't even say it, but they call it, a certain kind of country that you fly over, as if it was somehow not worth any attention, which as a Midwesterner galls me. Uh, and Wright Morris is the champion of how could you think that there was nothing to see here in Nebraska and Kansas? So this kid, Schuler, goes out into the landscape and finds, among other things, these fossils record that the plains are especially, an important place for, the fossil record, as far as I understand, which I understand nothing of. but he, like you said, he keeps this to himself, and he realizes, like you said, that explanations, however clever they were, would surely fall short of his expectations, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that definitely is a stand-in for a lot of things, but especially sort of what he is studying, which is the origin of the prehistory of animals,
Hmm.
and fish. And he's starting to find these amazing things. He's curious, and he actually ends up, of course, in a couple, really 4 pages, becoming a professor of this stuff. And so he obviously does learn about it, but even as a kid, he's resistant to the idea that you could really, truly explain this miraculous discovery.
Yeah. So this thing about the way Wright Morris builds the story, I mean, at the very beginning, we get just a little bit of Schuler's boyhood, just a little bit, and then we get it in flashbacks. But it's such an interesting way, I think, to build the story is that you find out about his doctor father and about his mother and a little bit about where we are in Kansas. And then this boy, our main character, and his cousin Bernice, and some of these details are so interesting to me. But I feel like by the time I get through the first few pages, and he's still very young before the part where his father dies, I feel like it's Schuler fully formed, like already I don't want to say an old soul because as an older Schuler, I think of him as a very kind of young person, like the way he looks at the world with such awe and wonder. I feel like is a thing of childhood. But anyway, yeah, I just find so interesting the structure of the story.
Can I just go back what you just said, awe and wonder? And
Yeah.
there's no more Wrightian word than wonder, as the the greatest scholar of Wright Morris is Charles Baxter. And Baxter points out in one of his beautiful essays about Morris is his use of the word wonder, and that he is in novel after novel, and this story, which is my personal favorite of his, is this sense of wonder, and that Morris, in spite of the world going to hell, and it's always going to hell in his work. Uh, we're against hyperbole, and yet, of course, we do it all the time. But I would say, there are a few writers who do kind of deploy the sense of wonder like he does. And I think in this story, especially, you have this young kid who has no need for friends and no need really even for family, but he has a sense of awe and wonder at what he is finding in a place that most people aren't finding very much. And that to me is just such a he's a sad person. The story is called The Origin of Sadness, and he seems to be extremely and the word appears in the story, melancholy. But I just think you hit on it, like this sense of just this sense of awe and wonder, which is not always an exuberant thing. It's a sobering thing. And I think in this story, that's kind of the deal.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like so much of the story for me, this reading was I'm right with him. I'm right in line with him, looking at something or thinking about something that I will never share with another person.
What would you never share?
I ain't telling you.
Fair, but like not because you're not interested in the fossils or something else.
I'm sorry.
I deserve that.
It's this thing of so this reading, I don't know. I don't know what. I'm older now than the last time I read it. Things are happening in our world since the last time I read it. I lived by myself for 4 months recently and spent a lot of time outside. And I'm not going to answer the question. I have it on the tip of my tongue, but it's almost like answering it is
Well,
it.
it's fair. It's what yeah.
Yeah, I know you understand this too. That it's just this idea of there are things that you cannot articulate, as you said earlier. There are things that you cannot express when you are thinking about a work of art, a story, a painting, something in nature. There are certain things you cannot share. You can get close, but I think there are just some things that are just for us. And I promise I'm not going to jump the gun and go all the way to the last part of the story to try to explain what I'm trying to say. But Even, I think, in the paragraph with Bernice, he had persuaded her, although she trembled with fear, to corroborate his own observations. Like he wants her to see and record and report to him and corroborate what he has seen or what he is surmising about the bats that she's looking at. And this shared world opened horizons to Bernice that were not somehow apparent to Schuler. And he is far more open to the idea of the observation and recording and being in complete awe and wonder about something. Her large eyes fastened on his animated face. His lips parted to show his uneven upper teeth. A gap where an incisor was missing made him reluctant to smile. So she's looking at him while he's saying to her, observe the natural world out here and report it back to me and corroborate what I think is happening. And he can't even share that with her, even though it's, she's his cousin. It seems like she likes him. I love that part because it's so true that sometimes, if you say to somebody, oh my God, you've got to listen to this song or whatever, and you just cannot reach them. I think we try to do that with the podcast, but as you say, it's almost like, no, you just have to read the story. But we can geek out and we can read paragraphs and we can talk about things and anecdotes and so on and try to share our wonderment and awe of the story. But this story for me this time, I had to stop myself from texting you or calling you and just saying, I don't know if I can do this one because it's going to be very difficult.
I mean, and I think this is the problem, and it's not a problem. It's just that I think that I mean, we take this stuff way too personally anyway, right? But in this
Yes.
particular case, it's a story that I feel pretty protective of, and I'm hearing that from you. And why? I don't know. I mean, it's not a perfect story by any means. It's a weird story. In fact, just as a note, Bernice, who seems to be an important person in his life, after that reluctant smile that he's reluctant to smile because he's missing a tooth, and that lands on Schuler. Bernice is gone. Bernice never appears again. Space break, and he's moving on. And in a page, he's a professor. And Bernice is long gone, and he actually meets a student who he ends up marrying, and we'll talk about her in a moment. But one thing I wanted to quote, because I do think that there are things about the story that I keep thinking about, and this is one of them. A history teacher, Professor Alexander, early noted the drift of Schuller's mind for the time that preceded history, the vanished, relatively timeless past, most of it buried beneath the earth's crust or entombed in its rocks, inflamed his imagination. Alexander was the first to point out to Schuler that the remote past, if it concerned living creatures, continued to be part of the present. This simple observation overwhelmed him. I just think that's a pretty extraordinary distillation of somebody who has this, scientific bent and the incredible imagination that it takes to get there.
Mhm.
I paused on that this time and I'm like, oh, right, right. The remote past, if it concerned living creatures, continued to be part of the present. That's where you can, trace evolution, right? I mean, this is so obvious. We know this, but it just seemed like he had it sort of spelled out for him in a way that I think I just hadn't thought about myself ever, you know.
Mhm. But he has this kind of need to, after that, to share with somebody, in this case, Bernice. It overwhelmed him. In a few weeks, it diverted him from the study of rocks and meteors into the labyrinth of evolution, which we need to talk about, I suppose, where in time, in the fullness of time, he would surely come up with the answers. These were the feelings he shared with Bernice, a cousin 3 years Schuller's senior. They may have spared him, if not her, the torment of romantic attachments as she gave to Schuler freely the respectful attention that he both needed and took for granted. This is interesting to me that he is such a solitary figure. He's such a solitary person. There's this kind of idea that he wants to share it with somebody. And it comes and goes. And sometimes he really is not about it. And that's so real, too.
But I think right there, you you get at the power and the weirdness of Morris because his characters, as solitary as they sometimes are, and I don't want to get off the story, but I think of a character, Tom Scanlon in Ceremony and Lone Tree, who's this fossil of a human being who's living by himself in the remains of an old hotel on the prairie. It's the human connections, even for somebody like that, that animate the stories. His people are never alone. So Schuler thinks that his only kind of what gives him energy in life is studying the fossil record and thinking about evolution and thinking about how things developed. But this story is all about his connections to other people, as distant and weird and unsatisfying as those connections are. And I think that the sadness of the story is in that. It's in the connectivity. I think, I mean, again, I feel like I'm trying to avoid understanding the story. But if there is any understanding to be had, it's that we have a solitary figure who does have enduring, if extremely unsatisfactory, at least to our eyes, to the reader's eyes, relationships, which I think brings us to his wife. What do you make of Doreen? And, I mean, it's worth saying that this story was written in what, 84? And may have some dated elements to it, you know,
Yes.
and things that may piss people off, rightfully so. But how do you read Doreen, and is she a character to you?
Oh, yeah. For many reasons. I mean, okay, I'm sorry. The way that flat characters work when they really work. I always tell my students, or I used to tell my students, flat characters are so important. Don't ignore them. They're doing something very important. And I feel like she's such an important character, as silent as she is, and as sort of, she's there, she's not there anymore. But I feel like we know a lot about her that helps us understand not just her, but him. So she was one of his students, and she had a passion. Let's see. She shared with Schuller both his passion for bones and his talent for silence.
That line, talent for silence, is pretty wonderful.
Oh,
Right.
yes. It is a talent sometimes, I think, to a person who wants silence. Um, Doreen Oakham often sat, her hands idle in her lap, while Schuller stood as if entranced at the window of his office, seemingly unaware that he had fallen silent. So you just picture them sitting there, and both of them are being quiet, and he's looking out the window, and she's just sitting there, and he's doing something else. He's thinking about something else. So this idea about her, eventually they do get married. But there are interesting details about her that I'm not sure how they play in 2025. But his ideas about her are interesting, but they're very honest. So on her mother's side, she's Cherokee Indian. The description is square-shouldered, slab-flat young woman with plain features that somehow proved to be striking. She was dark with large prominent eyes, a wide full mouth, her complexion like that of a dull penny. Her manner was impassive, her face without expression as she listened to Schuller's ponderous soliloquies. His own feeling was that she was all Indian, but ashamed of it. His impression of her in his mind's eye was one of extraordinary, unrelieved flatness, like that of figures sculpted in low relief. Her arms hung straight from her wide shoulders to swing free of her narrow hips. In his office, she sat erect with her knees pressed together, a clipboard with yellow paper face up in her lap. He learned to be at ease with her impassive manner, since he sensed that it concealed strong emotions. Interesting from a person who seems to like to be alone and likes the quiet, even though he knows there's something else underneath the surface, he doesn't mind that. And she's a very good artist, and she can make drawings of leaves and things. And he wants her to capture the flaws in these things and not to make them perfect in her drawings. All of this is interesting to me. I just think she is such a rich character when we get to see her in the story.
No, I agree. I think, again, the things you mentioned notwithstanding, technically the stories from the perspective, the point of view is of its time and place, of Schuller's time and place. And so, this is how he sees her. We only learn about her through the scenes, and they're wonderful. His proposal, he's driving along at some point, and he hadn't planned this. But he could not say with assurance that marriage was what he wanted. But on the long drive south, he had experienced an urge to be free of his self-perpetuating obsessions, the rocks left for him to find, the bones left for him to classify, the truths left for him to discover. To all of that, he knew there would be no end. He felt compelled to share with her his entrapment. Now, this is not a romantic moment, right? He had stopped the car, asked her to be his wife, and she had not objected. He had never courted her. He had seldom actually desired her. But at that moment, he had acted with deep assurance and satisfaction as a person might feel at his conversion. Her response was so low-keyed, he was not really sure she had accepted his proposal. While he mumbled his proposal, and so, I think that another wonderful thing to me, there's that word again, wonder about Morris is how awkward he can be in his instructions and somehow still get to the kind of emotional heart of something. While he mumbled his proposal, he had left the motor running as if ready for flight if speech failed him. And here's the just this amazing. Her hands fingered the clasp of her handbag, but the silence between them, as they both knew, was a form of assent. Now, we both can imagine, like, let's say, teaching a story like this and having students read about this moment, and easily judge it with, distant eyes. But I feel like there is something between these two people that is uh, genuine and a bond for better or worse that is exists there on the page and makes these people real to me.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, it makes them real. There's a line where it said, he was a bit of an odd one. When he took one of his walks, God only knew he was off to. It did stretch the mind of those who had them to visualize the vast plains as the bed of a sea and later a swamp where dinosaurs waddled. But once it was envisioned, as in a diorama, Schuler found it as real as what he saw around him. No, make that realer. I love this idea because I feel like that's how the story is. It's like, even if we think, oh, our students, I don't know, they might not understand how this could be a proposal and how they could get married and be together. No, it's very real. It's all too real. So I'm glad you said that.
That doubling back that he does that you pointed out, Schuler found it as real as what he saw around him. No, make that realer. That is, it's I mean, you could again these sort of like these ticks that Morris has that he somehow is able to get away with it. I get a feeling sometimes like he's murmuring to himself as he's writing, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah,
he goes back to the story. There are moments where you feel these interjections which are a little bit that doubling back, that sort of like second guessing, that sort of, or affirming. Like,
yeah,
no, actually, I mean it's even realer. Like
yeah,
that's he's like, don't even this isn't I'm not messing around here. This is real. It's so real. It's
yeah.
realer than real. Anyway.
And what comes next? Like, I just look at this and think about, if our students were reading this, what's going through their heads? Well, what happens with the honeymoon, right? So, in no way whatsoever did Schuler prove adequate to the intimacies of marriage that could not be avoided. But his wife gave no indication that anything should be more or less than she found it. So, and then the other part, and there's, the thing about going to meet the parent, the mom, which, I feel like the Aunt Ilsa, there's the mom and then there's the aunt back home in Kansas. And I found that very interesting too, like to be creative writing class, like we already were sort of like Bernice isn't in the story anymore. And why do we really need the aunt? I know people wonder about, there's that word, but people think about things when they're reading a short story. I think sometimes their reading life has been infected by I don't know, the prescriptiveness of a creative writing class or something.
I mean, it's, we're we can go into that detour for a long time, and it isn't just, I wouldn't just blame creative writing classes. I would blame,
Oh, yeah.
even more, my blame would go to how literature is taught in general. But and the story Morris is so interesting to me, and it's not what we do here. We talk about stories, but obviously, you know, this is a guy who wrote, 30 plus books and was a
Hmm.
incredibly well-known photographer as well as writer. And in his day, he was a big deal and he won the National Book Award and there were a lot of attention in his day. But it seems that to me that the writing is so singular that I'm not surprised at all that that it fell away after his death and long time before that too. It's just there's something just very odd, and he specializes in like you said, like he's odd. He specializes in odd characters, of which the world is full of. But how often do we read a book and find people aren't odd?
And to me, the more odd, the more real.
Of
And
course,
and
yeah.
and not even in a way that's gratuitous or just weird for weird's sake. Like I cannot stand those sorts of books or novels or characters where it's just weird for the sake, and so it feels so gratuitous, and I don't know, but there's something about even like the description that follows about the food. They settled into an apartment, and there's this thing about Schuller's interest in food proved to be for, well, let me read it. Hang on. Schuller's interest in food proved to be for anything easily prepared and quickly eaten. He liked canned grapefruit better than fresh, and never tired of peanut butter spread on white toast. And then the other thing, and I hate to speed through this because there's stuff here about Lake Michigan. There's stuff here about
Yeah,
his.
it's wonderful, but he likes ponds better than larger bodies of Lake Michigan, for example, with its rimless horizon. It just depressed him. Ponds were ideal, as were bodies of water that consisted of miles of shoreline. He just has his particularities,
Yeah,
and he wants to take in a landscape that he can get his brain around,
yeah.
which because he's Kansan, and he knows, like I said, the celebration of this landscape, which nobody tends to celebrate, generally speaking.
But
Uh,
if you think about this character of Schuler who can hold a rock in his hand and be able to meditate on that, I think he's overwhelmed by the larger body of water or the larger landscape. When he goes to the zoo in Philadelphia while his wife is away, he can look at an animal in a cage, but that also starts to overwhelm him, especially the ape, looking at the ape. And then, oh
Can we
God,
just read that real quick, though?
yes, I'm gonna slow down.
He felt for this creature a profound and close kinship, bluish black in color, his hands like patent leather. He crouched like a Buddha to peel and eat the ripe bananas Schuler brought him. He did this with delicacy and refinement. Man and ape exchanged glances that caused Schuler's hands to tremble. And I like we all sometimes experience this kind of sense, and it goes back to what you said about this sense of awe. We all sometimes are overcome by this, and when I read Morris and I slow down and just remember that, and I think that's why part of the reason I think we both maybe want to keep this story to ourselves.
Yeah. The thing too about this, and you mentioned this when we spoke yesterday about uh, Schuler's character being sort of based on Lorne Isley, who's a friend of Wright Morris. I'm like, oh, okay, great. He's at the zoo. He's going to look at the ape. And I'm thinking about the sort of the anthropologist and the scientist and this idea of evolution that's sort of underneath things here with talking about the fossils and all of this, and sort of things lost to the mists of time where he seems to want to exist. But I didn't count, but there is a mention of God here and there in the story, and I feel like this character, when he looks at the ape, is thinking less about evolution or about about Darwinian evolution and much more about if not God, then something, something spiritual. What is the origin of sadness? So I try to think about that idea. When did that start? Where is that fossilized? Where are the earliest seeds of that in all of this? So anyway, when he gets the parrot for Doreen, there's something else here that's happening with a creature that can talk. It was there in the apartment when she returned from Oklahoma, and it pleased him to see that it awed her. Their voices, as she spoke to the bird, sounded like those of a loving teacher and a slow pupil. It led him to recall his mother's complaint that what her home lacked was the voices of women. The bird, whose name was Georgia, learned to say many things, but it disturbed Schuler to find that Doreen did not clearly distinguish the bird's mimicry from human speech. There were things she said to it, for example, only in Schuler's absence. A deep superstition surfaced in her conviction that it might well speak for a departed spirit. Why not? Why would he, of all people, take exception to that? He took exception to that as he felt obliged to, so that she would maintain crucial distinctions. But in this matter, her large dark eyes seemed to observe him from a distance. There was no quarrel, but the invisible bonds that joined them noticeably slackened. Over the winter, Georgia began to lose plumage, exposing the thin neck and the ruff of feathers. The clouded eye that had fastened on Schuler so dull it appeared to be lidded. The relief that he felt on the bird's death filled him with shame. What Schuler loved about his wife, besides her glistening black hair, the scalp bone white where the hair parted, was her detachment from the world that hummed and buzzed around her attachment to the invisible world within her. The problem with earthly attachments, as the parrot had demonstrated, was that they were all made to be broken. It pleased Schuler to note that she did not suggest having the bird stuffed. I really just walked around with this idea of the zoo, and this time of the parrot, of the what is with the parrot that he's so upset about. With the ape, he sees something so human, and he assigns something so human to it. But the parrot is just parroting. To me, there's a soulfulness in hearing a bird talk, even if it's just parroting and it's meaningless. I think that bothers him. I think in Darwinian evolution for him, it's just like the bird's too far. He can't make the connection with the bird or something. Well, I mean, I found it so interesting. I don't know. It's just an unusual thing to include, but it shows a rift between Doreen and him too.
I mean, if there's a heart, if there's a swerve or whatever we want to call it, a pivot or in this story, this is the thing. I mentioned Charles Baxter earlier. I asked him about this story, and he's going to appear with us another time. But he said, I would have loved to talk about that beautiful, odd, quizzical story, he said. Quizzical. And I think this is a moment of very quizzicalness. Is like, what is going on? Why is he upset that his wife seems to have this connection with the parrot? And why does it bother him that she seems to not be able to discern? Or is it that she is not able to discern? Is it more of what you say? Is there something soulful, period? And what is he missing there? And I feel like it's a blind spot. I feel like and there's that line, and this is getting deep in the woods, and we have to apologize to anybody listening that this is what we do, and we hope people do take a look at this story. But also, it's not a requirement, right? You know, so, but there is a line where he says he took exception to that, the idea that she is, kind of having this communion with the bird, as he felt obliged to, so that she would maintain crucial distinctions. Now, I think you can read that in so many ways, but one way that occurred to me is he has a conventional bone in his body. He didn't think Schuler did, but he does. He thinks it's a little weird that she's having this connection and maybe a little spiritual and maybe, oh my God, it's Native American Cherokee, her roots are coming out. Like he is who he is. He's this white kid from the Kansas plains. I'm sure this reading is wrong, and I'm sure I'll think about it and try and backtrack it at one point, but it feels to me like it is this moment of kind of like a lack of generosity on the part of Schuler's part to be able to make that leap. But because he's has a certain conventionality and he's being like almost like a normal husband here, which Schuler's not, and it just struck me as being such a sad, human, ordinary moment where you just do something lame to your spouse,
Yeah.
that is inexcusable, and he has shame for it. He feels shame for it when the bird dies. That he's glad the bird's dead, so he doesn't have to deal with that anymore. I mean, that's probably just a dreadful misreading. I think your reading of it is far more connected to who Schuler is and his thoughts about the ape and stuff. But it just occurred to me just to dumb it down a little that he's just conventional in that moment.
No, I think I see that too. But the bird does come back where,
Go back. Yes.
yeah, where he just recalls the bird in a kind of heavy moment. Yeah. He stooped to scoop up a handful as light and dry as the remains of the parrot. So he recalls the parrot in a future moment.
Late in the yeah,
Yeah.
that which is an incredible simile or whatever you call it. Like he's comparing snow,
Yeah.
and this is late in the story, which maybe we shouldn't give away too much if anyone is planning on reading it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a strange comparison. But if you think about how light a dead parrot would be, it kind of makes sense. It's an extraordinary comparison, I think.
Yeah, and I am thinking about how in this way that we feel like people just have to read the story. I feel like we're coming to a point in the story where we should stop and maybe just say what's coming up. I do want to say something about what you've written about Wright Morris. I mean, there's so much, and you've written about him in Am I Alone Here and in Still No Word from You. There's this. As much as he was interested in people, Morris was equally obsessed in both his prose and photography with what he saw as the populated emptiness of abandoned spaces. Rusting farm equipment, old shoes, discarded clothes, yellowed mattresses, all were stories left behind. He once wrote, "What is it that stirs you about a vacant house? I supposed it has something to do with the fact that any house that's been lived in, any room that's been slept in, is not vacant anymore." And that's a quote from him. But I was thinking about how that applies to his return to Kansas and even the outside, to the exterior spaces that he goes to near the end of the story. I suppose it has something to do with the fact that any house that's been lived in, any room that's been slept in, is not vacant anymore. I don't know. I feel like he's assigning that condition to any space anyone has ever been. And in the case of Schuler's story, it's out there where, if he finds the fossil, it's out there. It applies to what's out there, too. He's drawn not to what makes us homogeneous, but to what makes us strange, you wrote. Morris's people, even when they are staunch conformists, aren't quite like anybody you've ever met. They aren't like anybody they've ever met either.
I shouldn't laugh at my own joke, whatever that is.
I'll laugh.
But I think that's
It's
true.
so
I
good.
do. He's the captain of the weirdness. But I think this story outdoes even that. And I think what you were getting at is that Morris himself and in his photography, which is just beautiful, and I think he's sort of compared, I think, to Walker Evans, but I think he's very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I'd urge people to take a look at some of his photography, which is in a lot of his books includes his photography in it, including Plainsong, which I do want to talk about if we have a little bit of time at the end. But this idea that in abandoned places, there's the ghosts of the people that once were there. Like what you said, it's like here, it's not the place, it's not man-made spaces.
Yeah.
And it's unusual, I think, for Morris because he's mostly, I think, interested in man-made spaces and in things that people make. If you look at his pictures,
Yeah.
they're usually houses or tools or people themselves. Um, it's not landscape for landscape's sake, but here the whole thing applies in a much grander scale is that, and maybe this is why he was interested in somebody like Isley, is that somebody who saw the abandonment in natural spaces, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's such an incredible, and that's why the story has just always moved me because I think it takes even the more, kind of what we expect from Morris if we're readers of him, it takes it into a whole nother place, another space, and it's bigger. It's bigger. It's only what, a 10-page story, but it's bigger.
Yeah.
In his love of fossils, of images trapped in rocks, was he not obsessed with a similar passion? Survival in one form or another, a blind refusal to accept extinction, a somewhat bookish and fanciful effort to hoodwink time. And this is the context here. However infrequent his visits home and however remote his investigations, his preoccupations had seeped into the minds of those who knew him. Why did he find all this so unusual? I'm sorry, I meant to say this weird thing about his mother. His mother, who is a wonderful character we didn't talk much about, but she, towards the end of her life, apparently has read about freezing in order to, like Peter Thiel and these freaks, they want to freeze themselves so they can live forever.
Yeah.
This is 1984, and Wright Morris is writing about people who have this obsession, not Peter Thiel types, but ordinary people.
Yeah.
And he's so fascinated by the fact, what is his mother? What does she have to preserve?
I know.
But she's clinging to life just like anybody else, and I don't know what this has to do with anything, but I thought I'd mention it.
That moves me so much that you say that. That moves me in the story, and it moves me that you said it too. And in your essay, you said Morris, I believe, woke up every day thunderstruck at the variety of human existence in Nebraska alone. I mean, I feel like, yeah, like there's that idea, like, what can my mother possibly have that should go on for, that should be frozen and then be able to come back. That hits me right in my heart. I don't know. It's just because because she has multitudes, but she just, yeah,
These such a moronic and dangerous Peter Thiel, but these kind of people would have no clue that a housewife on the Kansas plain wants to get frozen also. They would think it's reserved for the Elon Musks and
yeah.
the great whatevers of the world, but they're so removed from people like this, and
But I think that Wright Morris does not think that he thinks that we all deserve that I don't know.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what's so
No,
moving. That's what's so moving.
he's the opposite of all of this stuff. And again, this is why he's so kind of unpopular.
Yeah,
His ideas are unpopular. I think that they wouldn't even if he was read, people would reject his, there's no other word for it, but sort of, weird Midwestern humanism.
yeah, I love it. Also, I wanted to say the thing about the cat in the window when they're moving the house. I
Oh
just
yeah, I mean
love
it's
that
just that's the
detail.
kind of I mean he's the details, he's the king. He's the king. His eye doesn't miss anything.
I
Again,
know.
the spaces that most people, I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people would miss. Morris, he sees it. He sees it. He sees that cat in the house that's being moved. It's so great. It's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening for our discussion on The Origin of Sadness by Wright Morris. Stay tuned. Coming up next, we're talking about the story by Wright Morris called Real Losses, Imaginary Gains. Real losses and imaginary gains?
Yep.
How does this story fit in for you in this Wright Morris state of mind?
You recommended the story, which is great because I don't remember that I've ever read it. It's weird. Some books, you just keep reading the same story.
Yeah,
For me, it's Origin of Sadness, but this phrase, imaginary, what's the phrase again?
it's real losses, imaginary gains.
Real losses, imaginary gains is, I think he loved this phrase. It comes up, I believe, in his essays, and it's just something that he seems to, this idea is one that I think he he sort of cherished. And it's a 5-page story. And by the end of it, if you don't feel something, you don't have a heart. I mean, I just think that's basically how I feel about the story. And if you think like it's old hat or whatever, whatever, it's very, it's not like as kind of intensely crazy as some of his other work is, especially his novels, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a fairly straightforward story where a guy gets a letter from his cousin. The cousin says that Aunt Winona has died, and he just remembers the last time he saw her, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, I've lost a dog.
Oh,
I, I have lost a dog.
where?
Mickey,
Oh, no.
Mickey. Shit. I'm sorry.
Okay, go look for the
Let's
dog.
go. No, it's fine. It's fine. He's here somewhere. He's not going anywhere. He can't be that far. He doesn't move quickly, though.
Please find the dog. I can wait.
No, no, the dog's fine. Why did you choose this story?
You know what? It's such a. Oh, do you need to find the dog? I'm sorry. I'm so preoccupied about the dog.
No, don't worry about the dog. I'm walking around looking for the dog.
Okay. It didn't like it couldn't have gotten away or something,
You
right?
seen Mickey anywhere? Oh, we are looking for the dog. Don't worry.
Okay. So I just love this story. I love the idea of Wright Morris's love of photography and how it's sort of factored in here in an interesting way with the aunt's couch facing the door.
I love
And
that. It's incredible that framing.
yes.
Okay, we found the dog. Thank you.
Yay. Good. Yes, that part is yeah, this idea that she has to be on the couch. She's looking out at the world. The view is framed by the door, and it says, lying there, my aunt took in only what was passing. She did not see what approached or how it slipped away. And I don't know where I got this from, but I have this comment that I wrote in the margin. I do not know. I'm embarrassed I didn't give any attribution here. Did you write it, Peter? Where it comes from or where it goes? Only the thing there in its current state and in the moment. I don't know where I got that or who said it or what, but that's true enough that that's what her view of the world is at this present moment in her life, where she's just on the couch. She doesn't see where things are coming from or where they are going. She just sees them in their current state in the moment.
I mean, not to be highbrow, but it does feel a little bit like this idea of Plato's cave, what you
Yeah.
can, what you see. You know what I mean? That
Uh-huh.
that that view that the prisoners in Plato's cave have. It occurred to me that this portal through which she looks out at the world is kind of the limitation, the limits of her life at this point. She's not moving off that couch. She only sees what she sees. It's like you say, he was a photographer, and I think he was like I don't know, it was aperture, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing image. And it makes a very ordinary visit to your aunt completely. And this is what he does, right? He makes, this is what his pictures do. This is what his stories do. This is what his novels do. He makes, in the most basic sense, the ordinary, like not, it just seems like a cliche. You make the ordinary extraordinary, but I mean, Wright Morris really does it. Like he's not screwing around. Like he really does it. That's an extraordinary idea to be on your aunt's couch in the middle of, she's this one's in Idaho. He's always taking, she's- his own family radiated out from Nebraska, and I guess in her case, it was that her father felt crowded in Nebraska, which in itself is funny, right? And
Yeah.
so here, she's in just, but so that's why she's in Idaho, and it's just a beautiful idea of you take an ordinary visit. We've all done it to an aunt that we don't see very much, right? And in Ray Morris's hands, it becomes this thing that we wish we paid more attention to when we did it.
where when she says there, what is the line? There's nothing much to me, is there? That breaks my heart. But you realize that this is, it's a little self effacing. She's this older woman, she's maybe shrinking a little bit and getting smaller. But yes, you're right. It's like he's magnifying her, even though all she can really do is sit there. Don't hang up. But there's this kind of theory of photography. I know we don't want to talk about literary theory, much less theory of photography.
I'm all for theory in other arts. Just
Okay,
stick
good.
with that, that crazy literary theory stuff.
Well, there's this thing of we study it in creative writing classes. This idea of studium and punctum, the two ways that you can engage with an image. So you have the studium, which refers to like the general view, and the punctum is the detail that will break your heart, right? So it's just a very interesting thing about photography that I've been thinking about photography and writing as I've been rereading the stories. When he describes the ant looking out the window and lifting her head and calling the woman that's out there, and it talk about compression. There's so much that he layers in there. Let's see, perplexities of this sort might lead my aunt to place her face in her hands as if weeping. What she hoped to contain was her laughter, not at all that of an elderly religious woman. On my father's side, all of my Protestant aunts shared a common ceremony to ease the pain of this world, uttering no word as they gathered their aprons to hurl them like tent flaps over their heads. My Aunt Winona laughed. One might think it the muffled mirth of a child. I mean, it's so lovely about her. She's this aunt who didn't get married and who, I don't know, who he appreciates for how she sees the world in an interesting way, even though it seems like she hasn't seen much of the world. But in this moment, I think he can, it sort of opens him up and he just really appreciates it.
I think you hit on another key idea, which is that these people who we might think haven't seen a lot of the world, that becomes a almost a ridiculous assertion in this story and in Wright Morris in general, is that his people may not have gone very far. In this case, the father went from Nebraska to Idaho, and it sounds like she never left Idaho. But like you say, that has nothing to do with how much of the world that you know. And it makes me think of there's a beautiful scene in Plain Song where, not to be confused with Plain Song by Kent Haruf, a very fine book,
Yes.
but not Plain's Song by Wright Morris, which is a extraordinary book. And in Plain's Song, there's a scene where Cora, the grandmother in the story, goes to Chicago for the first time, and she's completely out of her element and really sort of stymied by it and horrified by it. But it's not because she's not worldly, it's because she's picking up too much sensory details. It's a beautiful scene. And this character reminds me of the people in that book, who do venture a little bit further sometimes, but are very much of their place. And just because of their place, it does not mean they are entrenched in a kind of settled way of thinking or anything. I mean, they're completely individualized, always,
Yeah.
you know, and that to me feels like Aunt Winona's that. There's a gorgeous, he says, I was a young man of 19 before I set eyes on my aunt and other members of my mother's family. I came west from Chicago, my locker covered with stickers of Ivy League colleges I hoped to go to. I forget where Morris ended up, but he, just as for reference, he lived much of his life in California and Mill Valley. And he was in Mill Valley teaching at San Francisco State, where I used to work myself, and just but spending his entire imaginative life back in Nebraska, much of it anyway. And so my grandfather was old but spry and a God-fearing man, long prepared for God. I saw him in the flickering glow of kerosene lamps, a second-time child to his matronly daughters, Only my mother was missing, and who died? She died right after his birth. And so this is autobiographical in that sense, I believe. He searched my face to recoup that loss. That's just it's an amazing sentence. Only my mother was missing, colon. He searched my face to recoup that loss. He hasn't seen them in 19 years. Why? Because when his mother died, and again, I do read this as autobiographical. I might be totally wrong. I might be totally off. But and Winona wrote him a letter not long before she died. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Well, I was quoting that paragraph. Only my mother was missing, colon. He searched my face to recoup that loss. I slept that night in a large bed with two uncles who assured me that my lack of Adventist faith was not crucial. The love of my aunts would be more than enough to get me into heaven if that was my wish. It turns typical stories on its head, right? I mean, he's the kid from the city who's come back to see this family that he doesn't really know. Instead of thinking he's a city slicker and not the right religion, they're like, "Don't worry, your aunts love you, though you'll get into heaven anyway, even though you're not a Seventh Day Adventist." It's just a gorgeous and funny line, but also kind of epitomizes, I think, we shouldn't give the impression that the Wright Morris world is light and full of love. It's usually not, but there is these kind of moments and this story is just full of light. In spite of the darkness, which is that, his mother died when he was just born. And Winona's the one to tell him this. When your mother died, my sister Violet, who was married, wanted to take you, but your father would not consent to it. And this line, and I think this recurs in other Morris stories and novels. The father says, "He's all I have left of Grace. Oh, dear boy, you were the center of so much suffering, so many losses you will never know, realize, or feel. He's all I have left of Grace." I mean, it makes me think of William Maxwell, who was in a similar situation
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
similarly moved from a small town in the Midwest to Chicago.
I like that you mentioned the lightness and the light because right after that paragraph about when he was a young man of 19, in the morning, my Aunt Winona, the only one not to marry, stood in the sunlit kitchen and watched me eat. Her first love had been the Lord, the second her father, and in this world she had found no replacement. It was him she saw when she gazed at me. She gave to this farmhouse kitchen the light flaming her hair, the time-stopped dazzle of Vermeer's paintings. She poured milk from a bowl, threaded a needle, picked up crumbs from the table with her tip-moistened finger. She was at once serene, vulnerable, and unshakable. The appalling facts of this world existed to be forgiven. In her presence I was subject to fevers of faith, to fits of stark belief. Like the grandfather, she saw me as a preacher in search of a flock. I mean, he gives her so much.
Yeah, yeah. While also noticing that she picks up crumbs from the table with her tip moistened finger, right?
Yeah,
I mean, how many times have we seen people do that? Our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers, right?
yeah.
I've never seen anyone write it.
I
I've
know.
never seen it. You know what I mean? There still exist these things that haven't been written,
I know.
until you come across a writer like this who, of course, was watching and, of course, took note of it and, of course, put it in a story.
So this idea of like, what is he trying to articulate? What is he trying to say with these stories? I mean, it's very hard to explain what the story is about to someone or to summarize it. To in this very short story, to talk about the water, the glasses of well water that he then brings up again at the end, and then you just get kicked in the stomach with this
Yeah.
ending in the story. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
You could do a whole, someone probably has some study of water in Wright Morris. There's stuff in Plain Song where the grandfather's drinking out of the well and he has the dipper and he's always holding the dipper. It's always about the dipper and that water. And so, I mean, you live on the plains, you're thinking about water, how he uses the factual details, and also moving from the tip moistened finger. He does this weird thing. It's like he's so specific, so detailed, then he'll write, the appalling facts of this world existed to be forgiven. I mean, it brings you to your knees, that line. I mean, no joke. But it isn't in isolation. It's always, I had my eye on her and her finger, right? And that's how, I just, nobody, few, I don't know. I don't know if anyone, you know.
You know what else just occurs to me? I hadn't really considered this too much. I mean, I have, but not really, not in any pointed way. The idea of, well, she never married, and she was not a mother. But when this idea about how she was not a mother and he didn't have a mother, no, in the flesh there was nothing much to her. She had reduced the terms by which we measure real gains and losses. I always thought she needed me, her nephew wrote, and now I find I'm the one who needs her. That's a miserable loss. And I think about this idea of how he is mourning a mother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the story is. And it's a pure, unadulterated, is that the right word? Form of just, kind of looking at it straight on. Again, gets the word that she's passed, and she even talks about the way that they talk about dying. And in this case, she did pass away. He he thinks that that's an appropriate phrase. Some people kind of think it's a euphemism and they don't, it's kind of almost like a protection thing, like it isn't real. You should say what it is. But in this case, she did pass away.
Yeah.
Um, there's a line like this: the windows of the house were cluttered with plants that filtered the light like cataracts. I mean, it's just sometimes his metaphors are just so, they creep up on you. I mean, I said I wasn't going to do this, like to be in the position of selling Morris, and I resent, I just don't. A writer like this doesn't need any selling. He just needs some readers to love him, you know.
Yeah.
I remember how I first learned about Morris. It was just his obituary in the New York Times. It was not very lengthy, but it was appropriate to a writer of his stature. And I just got curious, who's this guy from Nebraska that I never heard of? And I started with Plain Song after reading Charles Baxter's just extraordinarily gorgeous introduction where he really, lays out what's wonderful about the book without at all kind of stepping on it. And that was it. I read that particular book every year, and these stories also, except I hadn't known this one, so I'm so glad that you mentioned it because some of his stories, I got to be honest, aren't as good as this one. And that's why I think I sometimes didn't want to be disappointed by someone I love so much by reading more average stories.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a lot. He didn't always hit it. And I love him for that too. What is it I feel now, sitting here in the full knowledge of my loss? In my mind's eye, I see her couch now empty, the impression of her figure like that the wind leaves on tall grass. That's pretty great and awkward, right? The
Yeah.
impression of her figure, like I gotta even, it's hard to even get it right. I see her couch now empty, the impression of her figure like that the wind leaves on tall grass. That's just a crazy risky sentence. Like it risks like why, leaves and grass are too close to each other. But in this case, it's not leaves, it means the wind leaving the impression on the tall grass. It's a crazy sentence only he would try. It's a rap on Morris. And I'm going to send these to Edwin Frank. Edwin, are you listening?
Wright Morris is the author of The Origin of Sadness and Real Losses, Imaginary Gains. This has been The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner from Texas Public Radio. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.